This is Philly Talk with Philly Mike. Talking Sixers in the Bird Gang, that's our life. Competition, we ain't scared, yeah, that's what we like. Win or lose, you know we showing up and we gon' fight. You see we strive for the sky every day that go by. And every single week we screaming fly, Eagles fly. This is Philly Talk with Philly Mike, yeah. This is Philly Talk with Philly Mike, yeah.
What is going on, everybody? I go by Philly Mike, and this is the Philly Talk Podcast. Today, we got a special guest, Kayla Santiago. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
No problem, no problem. We got some important things to get to. You got Sixer Nation, feeling different ways. You got some really worried. You got some really confident. Just to start this off, how are you feeling about the season since we got Harden, the ups and the downs?
I'm feeling pretty neutral. I don't think I'm too down on Harden right now because I think that they'll be fine in the playoffs, and I think that he will eventually step up. Obviously, Philadelphia fans love to overreact on him having one bad game, but if you really look at the numbers, he's done a lot more good than bad. Obviously, the tradition that he has in the playoffs, it hasn't been so good with any of the teams he's been on, so that's definitely a little bit worrisome, but I think they'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think there is Philly sports is always an overreaction to Philly sports, and rightfully so. We've been through a lot. This team since getting out of the process, the reason we got the Ben Simmons and the Joel Embiids and all these first round picks is because we were bad, and to only get these guys and be in the second round and not really take that step out. Last year was the year we was really supposed to take it out, but the Celtics took us out in the second round. The Raptors took us out, and then the Hawks. We're at a standpoint. Harden was the big acquisition. I don't think Daryl Morey's done. This is year one of him trying to really turn this team around. You saw in the beginning, he went out and got Curry, got Danny Green, even though he's up and down, but you needed to get Horford's contract off. So I think to Daryl Morey's mindset is we got Harden and now we're about to build. But a lot of people are talking about championship or bust or at least getting out of the second round. That's where I feel the Sixers got to at least get out of the second round.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And if they don't, there's going to be a lot of conversations on what the heck this organization is doing, because you're talking about a team right now that has one of the best players playing at his best at the moment in a really tough position. And you're trying to put stars around him. And I don't think it's the last for Daryl Morey either. You're talking about guys like Tyrese Maxey, Matisse Thybulle, who are so young that Daryl Morey is going to want to build around them too. I understand Joel Embiid's window might not be as big, so that's why you have to get the acquisitions like Harden right now. But in a few years, this team could really go on to win a few championships if they do it right. But if they don't get out of the second round, it's going to be tough to watch.
I agree. And I'm going to keep in my head that Daryl Morey's just getting started. But again, that second round definitely haunts us. You were speaking on James Harden and feeling confident about his game. We know the ups and downs he had in the playoffs. That's more, in closing games. But he's never had a guy like Joel Embiid on his side. That's why I feel confident. But how do you feel about Harden being, since he's been a Sixer, I feel like he's more taking on. He's always been a good passer, right? He's led the league in assists a couple years ago, and he's in second right now with Chris Paul beating him by 0.6, I believe, per game. But how do you feel about James Harden creating his own shot, being aggressive? I just think he's been too passive, trying to get everybody else involved.
Honestly, I still think he's trying to figure it out. You're talking about guys like Tyrese Maxey going off. Tobias Harris sometimes likes the ball in his hands. And obviously, you need to get the ball in Joel Embiid's hands. I like when James Harden gets other guys involved and makes shots for guys like Tyrese, but it can't be all the time. You saw it last night against the Phoenix Suns. Sometimes he just has to pull that trigger because he obviously has that shot. But the thing about Harden, if you look through the quote unquote history of his game, he plays very well when he has a big man. You talk about Clint Capella. Joel Embiid is 10 times a player of Clint Capella. So it's really going to be interesting to see how they work. He just has to figure out around the perimeter. You're talking about still go to the goal and drive when you have guys like Tyrese Maxey. That's what he has to do. So I think it's interesting and I get it. And it kind of worries me because obviously the whole Ben Simmons thing of him never wanting to take a shot, but it's not that. It's just that James Harden is trying to feel comfortable. And I think by the time playoffs roll around, it'll be about a month and a half in. He'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think we got 8 more games. And the crazy thing is we play the Bucks on Tuesday. That's our last real big test. And so far, looking at some of the games that we lost with James Harden, talking about the first Heat game he didn't play, but we lost to the Nets. Now we lost to the Suns. So, we're beating the teams we're supposed to beat, but we're not being able to get over the hump against the good teams. I don't take any one regular season game serious because it's a different animal. In the playoffs, you get to see this team multiple times. It's more of a half court game. That's where Ben Simmons struggled. But what is your take on just, the depth on this team, right? Like that is one problem that the Sixers have. How do you feel about the Korkmazes and the Danny Greens and whoever else is coming off the bench?
I don't think it's as much as about a lack of depth. I think it's more of Doc Rivers' rotations, if I'm going to be honest with you. I think a lot of the time, Furkan Korkmaz should not be on the floor as much as he is. I know he has some really good stints sometimes, but it's just so hard to watch because you're putting him in and it just doesn't make sense. I would like to see Shake Milton out there a little bit more. Georges Niang, I know Shake's been a little beat up. DeAndre Jordan was on the court for way too long, in my opinion, a lot of the time. Maybe try to mix Paul Reed in there, Isaiah Joe, guys like that, because you need to figure out these rotations before you go into the playoffs. And the thing is about the postseason, you're not going to have a deep bench. A lot of teams only play with about 8 people, and that's how they're consistently going through unless it's a blowout game throughout the playoffs. So I think in that sense, it's more about his rotations. Not saying the bench is great. You obviously have to keep Tyrese Maxey as a starter. I'll be interested to see what Doc does, though, when there's games. Maybe you put Matisse Thybulle on the bench and you start Danny Green or vice versa, depending on the matchup, just because I think you need that spark plug on the bench and you don't have it right now. Danny Green's not going to be your spark plug type player unless he's having a crazy game, but he's just not that guy anymore. He's getting older in his career. That's not really his position. So it'll be interesting, but I think it's the rotations more than the lack of depth. And I'm going to be honest with you. I think Doc needs to put other guys in to see how they kind of flow and get this thing situated before they go into the postseason.
Yeah, Isaiah Joe was somebody that, a lot of us on this channel and a couple other channels that I collab with were, we were screaming for, where's Isaiah Joe? Where's the Paul Reed? Even Bassey at times. But now that we're getting closer and we realize Doc Rivers does not play the young guys. And I agree, a 9-man rotation is as far as I go. But we've seen Doc Rivers have a 10-man, 11-man rotation. Like last year in the Atlanta Hawks series, right? There was a game where Shake Milton did not play for 3 quarters and he puts him in the fourth quarter. Like when you come into the game, you got to know who's on your rotation. You can't just be like, okay, we going to just mix it up. I mean, it was the lack of preparation. And I agree, Shake, although he's up and down in his own right, he's our best guard off the bench. He's definitely got to be a contributor, but how much can he contribute? I think Niang's going to be the first guy off the bench. He plays well with Harden, maybe even more so than Tobias because Harden wants to pick and pop, pick and roll, and Niang can get hot from 3. Tobias last night looked great in the first half. Then he follows up that amazing first half with 2 points. Where do you see him fitting in and him being a contributor in the playoffs? Because right now it's been Embiid, Harden, Maxey, and sometimes Tobias.
See, that is what worries me because this is the thing. You cannot expect Tyrese Maxey, as great as he is, and I love watching him on the floor, and he just wows me, I think, every single time he plays. But you can't expect Maxey in the playoffs to be a 20, 25-plus guy at night. You just can't. He's young. He's a little bit inexperienced. He could do it. Don't get me wrong. I think he has the talent, but that's not the guy you should expect. What you need to have if you're the Philadelphia 76ers, if it's Harden has an off night, Tobias has to be the second guy and vice versa. Joel Embiid has to be on all the time, and he honestly has been throughout this season so far, but Tobias has to step up, be more consistent. I think he's also still trying to figure out his role with James Harden on the team, and I think that's the biggest issue right now because Tobias is decent with the ball in his hands, but then he does some things that are very, very questionable throughout the game. So I get it that they want to go to Tyrese Maxey, and right now he's the guy, but Tobias is going to need to be the guy that steps up in the playoffs because he has that experience. He's older. He's a vet. He is going to have to step up. And if that takes points away from Tyrese Maxey, so be it. It's a team win. You figure it out, but he has to be willing to take those shots in crunch time. And he has the ability to do it. It's just the inconsistency that is really worrisome going into the postseason.
True that. Real quick, just your take, so you again, no Korkmaz, and I agree. Now I did make a video a couple of days ago when Kork came in against the Heat. He had his 18 points. I just said that I think we need to see more Cork down the stretch of the regular season to just see if he's able to do anything. I agree with you. For the majority of Cork's career, I said he's not really an NBA player. He gets hot once in a while, has a little splash in the fourth quarter. He's been a little bit better on defense. But, I mean, like, you're talking about Cork Moss or Danny Green, and Danny Green is almost on E. And I don't think he got the money to fill up the tank with the gas prices being so high. I mean, he could catch and shoot every once in a while. I just think that, Furkan and Danny Green kind of offer you the same thing. And it's scary because one of them is going to have to get some minutes, or one of them is going to get minutes via Doc Rivers. But you did see Doc Rivers, down this stretch, bench Furkan Korkmaz. When he came in, it looked pretty good. It looked like Furk was able to sit on the bench and say, well, I'm not doing something right, came in and made the most of it. But there's not anybody on the bench that you can feel good about giving you consistent minutes. Shake would be the only one besides Niang. And then your take on DeAndre Jordan, Doc Rivers has had opportunities to play Paul Reed, right? The Heat game, when Joel Embiid didn't play, you had it went from Paul Millsap to DeAndre Jordan. So it looks to be that if some reason DeAndre Jordan don't play, don't expect Bassey or Reed. You're going to get your dose of 37 or 30, what, I don't even know how old he is, Paul Millsap.
Right. Yeah, I think this is the issue too. When you don't play them right now, you can't just throw them in the postseason. And I completely agree with you. They need opportunities to get in there and get comfortable and figure things out. They might go into the postseason and play 2 minutes a game. That might be all they're needed for, but that can't be the first time they're seeing the court in a game, whether anybody gets into foul trouble or DeAndre Jordan's not playing good or Paul Millsap's not playing good. You need a guy that doesn't drop the numbers so much in the minuses when Joel Embiid goes off the floor, because that's the biggest thing. Joel can now play a full game, though. That's also going to be the difference. Joel's conditioning is 100% better than it was, say, 2 years ago, 3 years ago in that Raptors series. But the thing is, if you're not going to play these guys now, you can't throw them in the mix then. So I don't love the Furkan Korkmaz idea just because I am respectfully not the biggest fan of him. Listen, the thing about Danny Green is that Danny Green is Danny Green, but he's a vet. He's going to be a guy that is going to communicate out there. And when it comes playoff time, that's somebody you're going to need. But you have to put the Isaiah Joes, the Paul Reeves, the Shake Miltons, the Georges Niangs, because if you don't, in the playoffs, they're going to be cold. And that's going to be an issue because you need to have some type of bench, or at least put them in a rotation with James Harden and Tobias Harris and have 2 starters in with bench rotation. Something's got to give there, and I think Doc needs to start doing that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I won't disagree. Like I said, I've been a anti-Furk person for a while. I just said, like, looking down the stretch, seeing what Danny Green gives, and listen, I'd rather see Danny Green in the game just because his veteran presence. He's been in the playoffs, he's been in the biggest game. So even when his body's not working, the mind's right. He knows when and where he should trap. He definitely lost a step or two, but I still rather him take the shot than Furkan Korkmaz. But my whole thing was, we just got to see. I think ever since James Harden's been on here, you've seen the different rotations and the different, substitution packages, because Doc Rivers got to figure out what he needs to do, right? You saw in the beginning, James Harden used to come off the floor Embiid came off the floor first. Harden stayed with the backups. Now you've seen a lot of Tobias with the backups. They're just still trying to find what works best when Joel Embiid's off the floor. We just don't really have the perfect solution.
I honestly think it'd be interesting to put Maxey with the backups and also have Shake Milton in there, because as we know, Shake Milton isn't the best ball handler when he's pressured, and Tyrese ball handling skills have gotten a lot better. But of course, with James Harden in there, you don't necessarily need to utilize them. So I'd like to see Tyrese also with the second unit in rotations. Obviously, he has to start still, but seeing him in rotations a little bit more, maybe playing a Tyrese Tobias with your bench and then James Harden and Embiid with your bench, or Harden, Tobias, Maxey, Embiid, things like that. It just has to be switched up a little bit. You can't have a lone soldier and Tobias Harris out there with the bench players. It's never going to work. It's never going to work. And you have to figure something out, because in the playoffs, you can't do that. You just can't. And you're only going to play a certain amount of guys. So Doc's rotations have worried me for a really long time, and they still are. So I think, you're right by trying to put people in to figure things out, to get things going. But I don't know. I don't even know if Korkmaz will get that opportunity, to be honest.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. He came in for that Heat game, did what he did, and
Right.
and the minutes went away. But it was good to see. I advocated for Doc Rivers to take Furkan out. He was shooting like 20% from 3-point line after the All-Star game. It was horrendous. He didn't deserve it. But I wanted to see Isaiah Joe get the minutes, and we never got to see that. Doc Rivers refuses to play the young guys, and that's one thing we lack on this team is the youthfulness, the athleticism, right? You see Matisse Thybulle getting up there, doing some high-flying things with James Harden on the court, but we don't got that, guy who's going to hustle. And that's been really killing us in the rebounding department and in transition defense. Let me ask you, what worries you more, us rebounding the ball, right? Or playing transition defense?
That's a good question.
They both suck.
Honestly, I would say rebounding because right now, transition defense, Harden genuinely can play defense well, and we've seen that in playoff games, right? We saw that in the bubble when he played very good defense. And I think that they'll be fine. I think Max is getting better defensively. Joel can get back. Matisse Thybulle is obviously a little sniper. The bench worries me, but rebounding right now, when Joel Embiid's not in there, it is horrendous. It is so bad. And we saw the plus-minus numbers in that Raptor series, and that was a big reason why the Sixers lost, besides the Kawhi shot. We're not going to talk about that. But listen, Joel Embiid's also better. How long is he actually going to play? We're talking about the regular season right now where you're not trying to burn him out and play him the whole entire game because you want to make sure he's okay for the playoffs. But in the playoffs, DeAndre Jordan might get, 10 minutes? 5 minutes? He still has to be a big piece of that offense and defense to try and get those boards. But they just got to crash them a little bit more. Honestly, that's one thing they're not doing. They don't crash the boards. They kind of just stand there and expect Joel Embiid to get the ball. When he's not there, that's the biggest issue. So I'm curious to see what happens, but I think rebounding is definitely a bigger issue, in my opinion.
And we're back. That's on my end. My bad.
No, you're fine.
Chat always. Shout out to Jose Serrano with the $2 super chat. He said, I can't figure out why the Sixers did not sign a legit six man. Let me ask you, when the whole buyout market was happening, did you have your eye on any guard that you thought would play pretty decent off the bench with the Sixers, depending on, when and where it came in?
I don't know if I had anybody specific, but I was really surprised that it wasn't done. I was, especially with Shake Milton's injury, I thought that Daryl Morey would for sure do a little bit more of the buyout market, and I was very surprised that almost nothing was done. I mean, you got DeAndre Jordan, but at the same time, it was a main necessity, obviously, losing Andre Drummond, but you still need a backup guy because at that moment, Tyrese Maxey is starting with James Harden. You need a backup point guard. Who's that going to be? Who's going to be a backup guard that can kind of stop and pop and pull back and shoot? They don't really have anybody. And I was honestly very, very surprised that Daryl Morey didn't try for anyone. I don't think there was anything specific that was really catching my eye, but I think a piece or two could have been done well. And then you could have gone with the guys who are on the two-way contract with Blue Coats and the Sixers, maybe drop them down a little bit and have a chance for other guys to kind of improve.
Yeah, shout out to the chat. I agree. I thought, a guy like Dragic would be good. They had what was his name? I forgot the guy who plays for Orlando. He was on the a possibility. Gary Harris, that's who it was. Just somebody that you can really count on, right? Like Shake was supposed to always be that guy. And, last year he showed signs towards it. You see sparks, but it's only for a certain amount of games. And then Shake goes back in his shell. He's not aggressive, not willing to do much. I think, Shake sees certain people on the court with him and he's just not willing to take that shot because it's not necessarily him missing. It's more along the lines of, him not wanting to look for his shot, just being too passive.
Yeah, and I think the thing is too that he's worried, oh well, if I really mess up or miss this big shot, like he's gonna be benched. Like obviously Furkan Korkmaz was, but at that point, like Shake Milton has to take those shots because when it comes game time, especially in the playoffs, you're gonna be a guy in that second unit that's looked to take those shots and that's looked to score a few points when you come in and there not be a huge drop off between the bench and you. So I would like to see him be a little bit more aggressive. Like I said, I think his ball handling skills need a little bit of work, especially going up against those tough guards in the playoffs. And I think that might be a reason why as well. But I understand getting everybody involved in that, but in that bench unit, you have to have the mindset to come in and take over so that guys like James Harden and Tyrese Maxey can get a little bit of break.
Yeah. The Sixers definitely have talent on the team. And I think in the playoffs, the star power really can come into fruition and take over. It's just that what Harden are we going to get? I just want to see him be more aggressive, during the game when he can be. I think he still got it. You can tell he's not the old James Harden. He's taking a little bit out of him to blow by guys. He's still got the ability to get down low and draw contact. I just think that, one thing Harden does as well with Joel Embiid is they're very smart and they know how to draw fouls. But sometimes I think forcing the issue takes them out of their own element. You know what I mean? And then they start getting frustrated. So I think they just got to be wise about when and where to do all that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is you realize if you're James Harden or Joel Embiid, no matter what, you're going to be double teamed, right? So if Joel Embiid gets the ball, the defense is going to swarm over to him. That leaves an open Harden, and that makes Harden even more dangerous. In that situation, he's got to do everything he can to be aggressive and score. And on the other side for Joel Embiid, when James Harden is double, because it's going to happen in the playoffs, Harden gets a little bit hot in the first quarter or the first half, defenses are going to go swarm him, and that allows Joel Embiid to get open and make something happen. So they have to play off each other. They're really doing that in the first few games. I think they can get that back. I think the good thing about Harden is you can tell he likes to be in Philadelphia. He didn't like to be with the Nets. You could tell that there was just something off a little bit there. I don't know if it was the dynamic between him and Kyrie. He wasn't liking the amount of touches he was getting, but not that he's the guy in Philly because it's obviously Joel Embiid, but he's the playmaker. He's the guy that is going to bring up the ball. He's going to shoot. He's going to score. And he needs to have that mindset kind of going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of people are saying the hamstring might be an issue. A lot of people are saying he's kind of just slowly getting ready for the playoffs. Like James Harden's been in the playoffs. There's nothing new for him. He's had, good playoff series. People don't honestly he's had good playoff series. He just haven't been in the game sevens in the Western Conference Finals. That's where, things have kind of died down for him. But him being a number 2, coming to this team, I said, look, he's on a team where in crunch time, he's going to have Joel Embiid. Back in the day, he had a number 2 and he was in a number 1. But he has been coasting. And again, his numbers coasting, other people in the NBA would love them numbers, right? He's still facilitating at a high level. He's still playing defense when he needs to and better than a lot of people think. The Sixers are still in the top 10 in defense. And that goes to show how much Joel Embiid has taken a step up in defense. He just never gets looked at for Defensive Player of the Year. But, you lose a Ben Simmons and you go from, 6th to 7th in defensive efficiency. That just shows how much Joel Embiid applies on both sides of the ball.
He's absolutely fantastic. And I think a lot of the times he doesn't get a lot of credit for what he does. I think a lot of people get frustrated, which what you said, getting fouled a lot and going to the line. But listen, If Joel didn't make those free throws, nobody would complain. It's because he's able to hit every single one and he's able to get fouled. And there's also times where he's in games and he makes big time defensive plays. And that has happened for the past few years. He is one of the best all-around players in the league right now, in my opinion. He's also a big, so the things he can do at 7 foot kind of just blow me away. And listen, I don't need James Harden to be 30-point James Harden in the playoffs. I just need him to be better than going through 5 games and not even attempting a field goal like Ben Simmons did last year. That is literally all you need. You do not need James Harden to be 30-point James Harden. You need him to get guys involved. You need him to take the open shots when he has them. And Joel Embiid's going to get the 35 to 37 plus that he gets every single night. You just need to be better than Ben Simmons. That's it.
Hey, that's true. And again, he just needs to be a guy who's willing to at least attempt 10 plus shots a game. There's no way James Harden should have less than 10 attempts. He just got to be a little efficient. But we saw that when he was being aggressive when he first got here in that first 5-game sample size, running a pick and roll with Joel Embiid, it looked perfect. I know we were going against lesser talent, but at the end of the day, you know, every bad team beats a good team in a long 82 season. And we just saw that the connection was there. And when the connection is on point, it doesn't really matter who's there. You're not stopping the pick and roll when it's flowing. I just see at times they kind of fall back on it, you know, not knowing when to start it, when to do it. You spoke about Harden being great with bigs. The only thing that is Joel is also a big that wants to do his own thing at times too. When you look at the rest of the East, let me ask you, who is the biggest competition? Like, if there's good teams out there. The Celtics have been playing good ball. The Bucks are still the defending champs. The Brooklyn Nets, as long as Kyrie and KD are there, they're good. They're 2 great players. Who are you worried about the most overall?
I would say the Nets and the Bucks, and here's why. The Nets are going into the postseason one of the most rested teams overall. KD and Kyrie have not even played half the year. They are going to be so rested going into the postseason. And now that Kyrie can play in New York, it's going to be absolutely crazy. And they're going to pull an upset because they might even fall into the play-in tournament. If the season were to end today, they actually would because they're in the 9th seed. And they're going to pull an upset. And I just pray to God that they do not face the Sixers in the first round because that's the last thing the Sixers need right now. But I think the Nets are scary for any team in the East just because of how well rested they are. You're talking about KD able to do so much rehab, able to train, able to do everything he can. You're talking about Kyrie, who is obviously playing out of his mind right now. And that matters. You talk about a guy like Kawhi Leonard, not to go off topic, but load management is a thing. And you see how he can attack in the playoffs because he only plays half the season. That's exactly what KD and Kyrie are going to do. And that's scary. And then the Bucks, I would say, just because I think they're the best matchup in terms of Giannis and Embiid. I think Giannis can defend Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid can defend Giannis. And I think they'll have a field day with each other. And the Bucks have pretty good guards as well. They don't have a James Harden, but they have guys like Drew Holiday. So I think the Bucks are a very tough matchup just because they match up very well with the Sixers in terms of similarities. And then the Nets are just extremely well rested. And you have Kevin Durant, one of the best scorers of all time.
Yeah, we got a lot of net trolls that come on the channel, especially since the James Harden, Ben Simmons trade, blah, 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 blah. So, you know, we try to not act like we scared, but I'm not going to say they're not good. And again, them 2 scorers are going to be a problem, especially if they get like the Currys and the Drummonds involved. But I do agree with your take. The Bucks are a tough team just overall. They got the guards where we lack defensive on the perimeter. They got a guy like Middleton who can get his own shot. And Drew Holiday, a guy who's always hustling, one of the best guard defenders in the league. And so when you put him on a Maxey, put him on a Harden, if you slow one of them down, it really slows down the engine, especially if you got Giannis and Lopez lurking for Embiid. They definitely can throw the double. The Heat were on my radar at first. You know, they've been really getting beat down, but Spoelstra's a coach that's very smart, knows how to adjust in the playoffs, right? Like if you have a weakness and you start to show weakness, Spoelstra is a coach that really can attack it. No worried about the Celtics, the hot Celtics as of late?
No, I think the Sixers have them beat in the matchup column, in my opinion. I think Joel Embiid has a field day out there when they play the Celtics, and James Harden is going to have the same thing. Listen, Jason Tatum can go get his 50 points. I don't really care. That doesn't bother me. But Joel Embiid is going to do the same thing, and I think James Harden can do very well against them. They have decent defensive guards, but they're not as good as the Bucks in my opinion. I just think they're hot right now. And yes, that can definitely help in the playoffs as you get ready to go into the season. But the East is so up and down right now. The Celtics lose one game and they could literally drop to third place at the moment.
That's just what happened to us.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. So you lose one game and all of a sudden you're in fourth place. It's crazy right now. The East is just so competitive at the moment, but the matchup's not there. It's the same thing with the Heat. Bam Adebayo is a great player, but he can't defend Joel Embiid. And then you have the Jimmy Butler and James Harden, which would be honestly a fantastic matchup because of their personalities as well. But I don't think the matchup is there. But then you go to the Bucks, you talk about guys like Giannis. Giannis can defend you well. You talk about the Nets, they have scorers, and the Sixers might go back and forth with them. The Celtics and Heat, to me, the matchups aren't there, and I think Joel Embiid is just going to have a field day, in my opinion. Not as much with Miami, though, because of Bam, but...
Yeah, and that's where I would agree with you. The Celtics, although they're hot, I just don't think they got any bigs to throw at Embiid, and so that's just foul trouble. That's just Embiid getting whatever he wants. Now again, Tatum, they're gonna kill us at the perimeter, but I don't really feel the Celtics. I think I fear the Bucks a little bit more than the Nets, although they got that dominant duo, only because I don't know. There's something about Brooklyn that I haven't seen them put it together all the way. They had one really, really good game and one not. So they just got beat by Charlotte, right? On
Right.
Kyrie's home opener, they got beat by Charlotte. But we could say the same thing. An outsider will say the same thing about the Sixers. One game they look scary, dropping $125. The next game they're not. That's where a series comes in. And although we don't like Doc Rivers, I think he can outcoach a Steve Nash who hasn't really shown me anything in putting pieces together.
And that's the thing. Like, I get it. You have Kyrie and KD, but coaching does matter at that point. When you're talking late in games, when you're talking about drawing up a play, when KD is completely swarmed, are you kicking it to Kyrie? Other than that, I know Seth Curry is a decent player, but he's been going off for the Nets right now, but that's not going to be consistent as they go to the playoffs. He's not that guy. He can give you a good 15, 20 plus, especially when he's hot. But coaching does matter. It really does. And we've seen that throughout the season. KD and Kyrie are playing very well together right now, but I don't know. They're dropping. It's going to be interesting to see what happens at the end of the season if they're able to, grab that 6th seed or if they end up playing in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, I agree. When you look at just real quick on the MVP talk, we didn't get into that. And I know that's been, just around the NBA, it's been crazy. Where do you, of course, Embiid is your guy, but how close do you think the next person is? And who do you think that is? Jokic, Giannis. Now they're trying to throw Jason Tatum. They're also trying to throw the Booker narrative in there. Like, he's been carrying the team, blah, 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 blah.
I think it's Joel Embiid. And then I'll say who's second. And I'm going to face my argument, not just because I grew up a Philadelphia fan, but you look at Joel Embiid right now. Everybody forgets what he did before Harden. Everybody forgets what he did before Harden. He was single-handedly carrying this team. And Harden comes and his numbers don't change. Everybody thought, oh, well, if James Harden comes, Joel Embiid's numbers are going to go down. Forget about MVP, but maybe we can win a championship, right? Joel Embiid is having even better numbers at the moment. He's averaging crazy numbers. So he's number one for me. I think Jokic is next because Jokic doesn't have a lot of help. I think Giannis has a lot more help than Jokic right now. But if Denver falls into the play-in tournament, which is a very big possibility right now, there's not a contest anymore. You can't tell me that a team that's a 7 or 8 seed is going to have the MVP when Joel Embiid is putting up better numbers, maybe not in the assists area, but everything else. I definitely, there's a gap there because of where they're seated. Now, Giannis is almost like 2A, in my opinion, because where they're seated right now. But I don't think Giannis is doing what Joel and Nikola are doing right now, in my opinion. I think that he's putting up the numbers. He's doing very well. He's obviously the MVP of that team. But what Joel and Jokic have been able to do throughout the entire season is just something Giannis hasn't. Giannis has also been in and out with COVID, injuries, things like that. He hasn't played as many games. And as we know from last season, that definitely plays a factor. So I would have Embiid, Jokic, Giannis. And then 4 and 5 change every single day, I feel like. One day it's Booker, one day it's Tatum, one day it's Luka Doncic, one day it's John Morant. So,
yeah, I agree. And no slight to Jokic because he's a great player. I just don't see the team. The usage rate is big to me too, right? Like, they're saying if you got the ball more, there's a more opportunity to score this, that, and the third. But it's also the reason Joel Embiid got the ball the most and it has the highest usage rate is because, for a third of the season, he's been the team, right?
Yeah.
Jokic has and Jokic can get assists and he's a great passer, but they're still deep. They got players on that squad that, even with no Murray, even though with no Porter, they're still able to play the game at a high level. You saw what's his name? I forgot the young boy, the Delaware guy who came in and lit us
Bones
up.
Highland.
Bones
Bones
Highland.
Highland.
You know what I mean? Now, again, that's a anomaly. But at the end of the day, Sixers don't got a guy who can come out of nowhere and do that. So, other teams in the league are definitely deeper. Playoffs really negate that, like you said, because of the smaller rotations. That's if Doc Rivers allows that. Well, let me ask you, if you had to look down the East and just, the top 6 seeds, 7 seeds, where do you rank Doc Rivers? It don't got to be, exactly, but how many coaches you think can outcoach Doc Rivers in a 7-game series just in the coaching front?
Celtics, Heat, Bucks, possibly Raptors, Raptors. Yeah, I think Nick Nurse is a phenomenal coach, and we saw that. Now, the Raptors don't have like a star player. They don't have a Kawhi anymore, but Nick Nurse is a phenomenal coach, and they have very decent pieces. Not that I think they would beat the Sixers, but I think you could talk about a grueling 6-game series. That really is physical, that's pounding, that could really hurt you for the next one. I think right now the issue with Doc is late in games, and that's the biggest thing that has hurt the Sixers a lot. The late in game play calls. What was the game against Denver? I made a video about it because I was so frustrated. You had a timeout to use with 7 seconds remaining. Why aren't you using it? You're going to give it to Georges Niang in the corner, a guy who should not have the ball in his hands at the end of the game, and he hits the backboard. Like, that's stuff that
he got his rebound. He got his rebound with like 2 seconds.
And then went for it too. That would not win the game. And I'm like, dude, what is happening right now? If you are Doc Rivers in those situations, you have to. That's when he is the worst. His rotations are not great and late in games. And some of these games, if you play the Nets in the first round, you have to be able to fix that up. You have to call those timeouts because you could have drawn up a play where Joel contracts the double team, you kick it out to Harden, ball game, right? So, yeah, Doc Rivers probably sits 5th for me, if I'm going to be honest.
Yeah. Now, see, like, I like the Sixers staff, and I like how Doc Rivers, not really molded Joel Embiid, but you've seen Joel Embiid's game change and shift and things of that sort. I think he's good at that part of the coaching, but you hit it on the head. The late game and the rotations is where he gets beat, and that's been his calling card. I mean, I thought the 3, he came into the Sixers as the only coach in the NBA to allow 3 3-1 comebacks. And I'm like, well, we can't always go on the coach for that, right? Like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were on the floor and allowing it too. But now that I see it, now that we live it, it's like, dang, we got Embiid and Harden on the court and we reliving it. The leads get lost. We go 4-minute droughts without calling a timeout or scoring a bucket. It's tough. Do you see a scenario where we don't want to say the upsetting season, but if there was an upsetting season, Doc Rivers being gone, Daryl Morey making that move?
I think if the Sixers don't get out of the second round, you have to. There is no way that they can't go further than they have in the last few years with having Joel Embiid as a possible MVP and James Harden on your team. And Tyrese Maxey developing the way he is. Now, who do you get in as head coach? Literally no clue, but somebody has to be held accountable for what happens if they don't make it past the second round. You don't have Ben Simmons anymore. You can't blame him. Joel Embiid's probably going to average his 30 points that he's averaged the past 2 years. Who's at fault at that point? It has to be the head coach.
True. So as the Sixers are constructed at this time, right? You got a crucial game, fourth quarter. Who do you think is the closer for this team? The overall closer?
It has to be Joel. I mean, you've seen Joel's ball handling and ball control get a lot better. Back in the day, you don't want to give it to Joel because you're afraid he's going to lose the ball, put it to the floor, and some guard is just going to grab it.
Swipe.
Joel has seen he can do the step back three. He can gain separation. It's not about him dribbling to the net anymore and trying to get an easy layup. He can literally do it from anywhere. You give it to Joel Embiid. Now, if I were Doc Rivers and you're late in a game, you either give it to James Harden because you know they're going to swarm him, and then you get Joel Embiid open, or vice versa. Because Harden can be that guy too. I think the whole closure mentality was a big thing when Jimmy Butler was with the Sixers because he was that guy. And I hated when he didn't come back and they didn't do the right things to get him back. But that's in the past because I love the Jimmy Butler Joel Embiid duo. But now I think it's Joel Embiid or James Harden. And Tobias Harris could also be that guy too. Tobias Harris can be that guy. I think a lot is his state right now. Like, I think that he needs to have an idea that he can actually go in there and take over a game because he has that ability and he's done it. But I feel like he just gets in these droughts and gets in these slumps and he doesn't really know how. At that point, U2 was ever open between those three. I would say Joel Embiid if I had to say one person, but you double team Harden, you give it to Joel. You double team Joel, you give it to Harden.
Yeah, I do think we have an abundance of people who is good enough to take that last shot or just get the ball, not even the last shot. You're up by 2, there's 45 seconds left. You make this 3, you make this 2, you go up by 5 or 4, the ice in the vein shot that kind of puts the dagger in it. Now there's only 17 seconds. They got to play the fouling game, blah, 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 blah. It's hard. As much as I love Joel Embiid, and I agree, he's been better with the ball in his hand, but, I've seen numerous times him get the ball and have to do it on his own. And that's where, again, we look at Joel Embiid like, why? You can't be tired in the fourth quarter. I mean, but he does everything. That's the reason we are a top 10 defensive team. You look at the roster in general, you don't see anybody that stands out other than Matisse Thybulle, but there's games we can't play him because of the offensive liability he is at times. Yeah. But Joel Embiid's working every minute on both sides of the floor, but he gets it to where he's tired. He got the ball. He doesn't want to put it on the floor so a guard can swipe. So he hits a fadeaway over a smaller defender or something like that, and then it doesn't fall. Maxey has been coming that guy for me. And again, you're like, you got Joel Embiid, you got James Harden, you got all pros and MVP caliber players. But Maxey's sometimes just the fact that do you want the shot, right? You've seen Harden pass some stuff up. Joel Embiid's a guy who's not afraid to take the shot for sure. But Harden has been a guy since he's been with the Sixers, who's been more passive. Like, who actually passed it to George Niang in the corner? Was it Harden or Embiid? I can't remember.
It was Embiid because people were mad that he didn't take the shot. He was literally triple teamed. Yeah.
But yeah, and he was triple team. He was at the elbow or at the free throw line or something like that.
Yeah, he was he was behind the arc because he was gonna take it and they would have won the game. But it was go to George Niang and the quarter is open, or maybe call a timeout and draw up a play. But yeah, that's what happened.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. Again, I think it's easier for a guard to be the closer just because you can really create your own shot and get separation. But as you said, Joel got that ability to do whatever, to step back, to fade away, and the body to go in there and draw the foul. But they're not really trying to call that foul at the end of time. They're not really trying to be in that situation where the league's like, wow, a foul with 4 seconds left. Now free throws take the lead or tie the game up. It's tough. And Tobias is a guy, when you look at his game, he does have that, right? The mid-range game has been a lost cause. And that's one thing the Suns have. Low key, people want to either shoot threes or go to the rim. And I understand that, right? NFL is all about the passing and then NBA is all about the three. But look at the better teams in the NBA. Chris Paul can get to that elbow anytime he wants off the pick and roll and knock it down. Booker has became a better three-point shooter, but he's deadly at the mid-range too. I want there to be a guy who can have that mid-range because NBA teams give it up. They want to run you off the three and they want to put bodies in the paint. And that mid-range is a lost art. And both Maxey's getting it, Tobias has it, and so does Joel Embiid. But when in doubt, if we're going to win or lose, I got to give it to Joel Embiid. I got to let him be the one that decides the fate.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what I said too. Having a closer and that mentality right now, you're obviously going to say Joel Embiid, but if Maxey is open in a quarter, he's hit that shot. You give it to him 110%. And I think Maxey's going to be that guy that's going to be the pull-up mid-range guy soon. Joel Embiid, his fadeaway is almost like a layup at this point, just how automatic it almost is. But Maxey is developing into that player, but everybody has to remember that Maxey is only in his second year. And I know people hate this saying that experience matters in the playoffs, but it absolutely does. So I think in situations like that, when you're in the playoffs, you have to look to those vets because, yes, you want Tyrese Maxey to get that 25. You know he can, but it might not be every night in the playoffs like it is during the regular season. And that's just how it is, especially if you're able to get deep into the postseason. So I would say Joel Embiid, but listen, if Maxey is open and he has the best look at it, I'm giving it to Tyrese Maxey too to hopefully win the game.
Yeah, and it's crazy how far Maxey has come. I think he should be in the discussion for most improved player. This is a guy that Doc Rivers barely played in the playoffs last year. We had 2-5, of course, but he barely played them. I think this year he's took strides all around. This guy came out of college from Kentucky, shooting like 29% from three. He's over 40%. The dude's worked on his craft in such a little time, and he's definitely got that dog mentality. When I was just talking about closers, a lot of people were talking about Mad Maxey in the chat. Shout out to the 120 in here, and definitely follow Kayla on Twitter. She constantly talks Sixers and all Philly sports, and she, she does her thing for the you play-by-play for the
Delmarva Sports Network. So out here in Maryland, I've been working every single day. We cover all the high school, colleges, and minor league teams around here. So in Delaware and Maryland.
Hey, shout out to you. But yeah, I mean, so, we came into this talking about how worried we are, not for the rest of the regular season, because we're going to go on a run. I think the Bucks is the last big challenge. And then you got teams that are C pluses and blah, blah, blah. We came into this saying neutral. I'm a big advocate for, the Sixers still look like a team that needs to be feared. I don't think we get the respect around the league that is deserved. But I'm all cool with the underdogness. You know what I mean? We've been here, done that for Philly sports. But I agree 100%. Second round is that the very first day we got James Harden. A lot of people were talking championship or bust. Pretty much to me, I wanted to talk about that, but it's just I got to see him get out the second round. That's really where I'm at. And then from there, you'll take it. And this to me has been the deepest the East has been. So, getting out of the second round other years should have been a lot easier. This is going to be a year that's a little bit more difficult because, we haven't talked about even the Bulls who've been showing a little struggles and whatnot. But the East is deep. Even the Cavs team, can, push maybe 5 or 6 games. I think the East is really as deep as it's ever been.
Yeah, and that's the thing, too, kind of going back to your point about MVP. A lot of people will say to me, well, Jokic plays in the West. And I say the East is not better, but it's way more competitive right now. The East has teams, literally, as we mentioned before, you lose one game and you could be a 1 seed and literally drop to a 4 seed at this point. The Brooklyn Nets right now are in the 9th seed and probably in fear of playing in the play-in tournament. Now, a lot of that has to do with them not having KD and Kyrie throughout the season, but you're talking about teams that last year were at the top. The Atlanta Hawks are at number 10 right now. So the East is a lot more competitive than the West. I'm not saying it's better. I'm saying it's more competitive. And you're right. I mean, if the Sixers face the Cavs in the first round, if they were to face the Nets in the first round, that's worrisome to me. And at this point, you can't even predict who's going to play who because they change every single day. The Nets might end up jumping up to 6 and not have to be in the play-in tournament, or they might drop all the way down to 10 and have to play in the play-in tournament. We don't know right now. So it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens at the end of this.
Yeah, and like you said, the West, though, you got to credit. The Suns they're 60+ win team already.
They're annihilating everybody over there, so it's fine.
Exactly. And it's like, the 1, 2, and 3 spot for the West. You're like, okay, we know these playing teams are going to be matched up with said team in the West, but the East, Tuesday it's this, Wednesday it's that. We were in first place yesterday. Now we're in 4th place. To me, I don't really care about the standings at this point because, once we start getting down to 2 or 3 games left, I think the Sixers are going to do their due diligence. Like, do we really want to play this team? Do we really want to play this team? Let's rest Embiid or rest the Harden just for GP. And the fact that, if a loss is the difference from playing the Brooklyn Nets or the Cleveland Cavaliers, we got a Cavs fan in here, but I want to play the Cavs.
Yeah, I don't want the Sixers to play the Nets in the first round. That really worries me, especially if Simmons comes back. Now, I have this weird take where I don't think he's going to play at all this year, but if he comes back or if they even play them, if they get knocked out in the first round with James Harden and Joel Embiid, it's not going to be good. I mean, some people have to get fired at that point. But listen, I think the Nets, whoever they play, they could knock out a top team in the East, and that's crazy. But that's how the East is so competitive this year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We about to see soon enough. Give me your take on this Tuesday's game real quick. Bucks, do you think the Sixers are going to play all the guys? Are we going to see a Harden miss? Are we going to see an MB miss? Are we going to see the legit starting lineup for what I think is the last big test on our schedule before it goes to, average teams that we got to finish out against?
It's tough because the Sixers played the Suns yesterday. So you're talking about James Harden, who kind of dwindled out of that fourth quarter. Is he okay? Is he banged up a little bit? Maybe they'll sit him out against the Bucks. I would like to see everybody play, obviously. And I think, you can sit people after that, but I think you have to play everybody against the Bucks, in my opinion, and then figure it out from there. But I wouldn't be surprised if Harden sits. I don't think Embiid will sit just because his conditioning has been so good. Yeah, the MVP is literally on the line right now. As long as he's healthy, I gas every time he falls, but as long as he's healthy, you have to play him for a few reasons. I get rest is important, but he has to be conditioned to try and play literally every single minute in the playoffs because he's going to be that number one guy. He's going to be double teamed. He's going to get worn down. He's going to be triple teamed. He's going to be asked to do everything. So his conditioning has to be the best as it possibly will be. And what better way to condition than actually playing game speed almost every single day?
Yeah, and just you saying that, I envision him falling because the dude loves to hit the ground. I don't understand. Someone just needs to work on him and landing because I think some of it is just like, it's wild. He's a hustler though, and he definitely plays his butt off out there. I agree with you in the whole thing. I think Joel Embiid had what was it, like 20 something games where he played straight before he rested. He's just been at a different level of conditioning. It's been good for him so far. You've seen him get little nicks. He's just able to shake it off. The MVP is, I think, on his mind too. I think maybe sometimes the team doctors come to him like, hey, you want to rest this one out? He's like, nah, I'm about to drop 40 this game. I need that on my resume. But yeah, the Sixers, I hope to get you one again closer to playoffs or during the playoffs. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I mean, I'm going to be super hype as soon as they get to the playoffs. I was literally at that Game 7 game when Ben Simmons passed up that dunk. So I'm ready for revenge as a Sixers fan. Yeah, spent $1 on those tickets, and it was a great time until that. So it's the year. I don't know if they'll win the chip. I think the Suns are the team to beat in the West, but past second round, let's do it.
Yeah, and Doc Rivers got a lot riding on this. We'll see how James Harden, how loyal he is. He's talked about that option. Don't worry. Daryl Morey, I think, is just getting started with, maximizing this roster. Whether we have to let Tobias go, he's a great guy, but you could really get some depth or another, superstar on the team. With what we're paying him. It's not his fault, right? Like I always say, Elton Brand said, here, this is what we're going to give you. He's not going to say, no, I don't want that money. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
It is what it is, but Daryl Morey wasn't here when that happened. And I think he looks at that contract like we could be having a Bradley Beal or one of them guys on the roster. But hey, Sixers to me have as much of a chance as anybody else. I'm excited for the playoffs, East and West. We'll see what goes on. Look to get you on closer to the playoffs, and we'll talk about it. Shout out to everybody in the chat. Got 100 and some people still in here. Hit that like button. It helps the channel. Appreciate y'all. And I'll be here Tuesday for the Bucks game. Until next time, follow me and Kayla on Twitter. That's where we talk Sixers 24/7. I'm about to tweet about it right now. I'm just kidding. But I appreciate y'all. We out.